The gun was already in his hand when Vincent Torino heard the noise. Not footsteps, not whispers. Something worse. A soft rustling, coming from inside his own mansion. At past midnight, there was only one rule in Vincent's world: anyone found inside uninvited did not leave alive. His men waited outside. This kill would be quiet. Vincent opened the pantry door, ready to fire, and froze. Curled up in the corner was not an intruder, not a spy, not an enemy, but a starving little girl, clutching a half-eaten piece of bread like it was treasure. Her eyes met the barrel of the gun. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she whispered a single sentence that shattered a man who had broken cities. "Please, don't fire my mommy. She doesn't know I'm here." That night, a Mafia empire didn't collapse by bullets. It cracked, because of a child who was just trying to survive. Vincent Torino had always believed he was immune to darkness. 30 years immersed in blood, betrayal, and whispered deals behind locked doors had trained his nerves into stone. Fear was a luxury for weaker men. Regret was something buried long ago, alongside names he no longer bothered to remember. That was what he told himself every night when the mansion fell silent and the echoes of his life came crawling back. And it worked. It worked until that night. It was past midnight when Vincent returned home, his tailored coat still carrying the cold of the city, the iron gates closed behind him with their familiar final clang. His men remained outside, as they always did. Inside the mansion, Vincent preferred solitude. Silence was easier to control. He moved through the marble halls without turning on the lights, guided by memory rather than sight. Every corner of this house had been paid for in fear. Every polished surface reflected power. Nothing here belonged to chance. Then he heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing, something softer, almost shameful. A faint rustling sound, like paper being touched by trembling fingers. Vincent stopped mid-step. His hand slid instinctively inside his coat, wrapping around the grip of his gun. Any other night, he would have fired without hesitation. No questions, no mercy. Intruders were not mistakes. They were messages, and messages had to be erased. He followed the sound toward the kitchen, each step measured, controlled. The mansion was supposed to be empty at this hour. The staff had left hours ago. Whatever made that sound should not exist. The noise came again, clearer now. From the pantry, Vincent reached the door, raised the gun, and opened it in one smooth motion. The light snapped on. For the first time in decades, Vincent Torino froze. There, curled into the corner like something abandoned by the world, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her clothes were too thin for the season, hanging loosely on a frame that had learned hunger far too early. In her hands, she clutched a small plastic container of cold pasta and a half-eaten piece of bread, both clearly pulled from the trash. Her fingers were red from the cold. Her knees were drawn tight to her chest, as if she were trying to disappear into herself. The gun in Vincent's hand felt suddenly heavier. The girl looked up. Her eyes widened when she saw the weapon pointed at her. But she didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't even cry. That was the first thing that unsettled him. Children screamed. Children ran. Children begged for their lives. This one didn't. Instead, her lips trembled, and she whispered, "Please, please don't fire my mommy." The words hit Vincent harder than any bullet ever had. Not, "Don't kill me," not, "Please let me go," "Don't fire my mommy." The girl tightened her grip around the food, instinctively shielding it with her body, as if protecting leftovers could somehow protect her mother too. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, silent and uncontrollable. "She didn't know I followed her," the girl continued in a broken whisper. "She works very hard. She says we don't take what isn't ours. I was just hungry." Vincent lowered the gun without realizing he'd done it. His chest felt tight, as if something long dormant had stirred and didn't know how to rest again. He recognized the girl now. Isabella. He had seen her once or twice during school holidays, waiting quietly in a corner while her mother cleaned. Carmen, the maid who never complained, never asked for overtime, never missed a day of work. The woman who had learned how to survive by being invisible. Vincent crouched slowly, careful not to startle the child. Up close, the details became impossible to ignore. The worn soles of her shoes, the faint bruises on her knees, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of nights spent listening to her mother cough instead of sleeping. This wasn't theft. This wasn't mischief. This was survival. "How long have you been doing this?" Vincent asked softly, his voice stripped of command. Isabella shook her head, tears falling faster. "Please don't tell her," she begged. "She'll think I'm bad. She says if she loses this job." We lose everything. Those words pierced him deeper than any threat ever could. Carmen had pride. Even when she was drowning, she refused to reach for help. Even when her child was starving, she chose dignity over mercy. Vincent felt a familiar anger rise in him. But this time, it wasn't aimed at weakness or betrayal. It was aimed at himself, at the wealth piled around him, at the waste he had never noticed, at the fact that a child was eating scraps in his house while he debated wine prices worth more than her rent. Behind him, footsteps echoed faintly in the hall. One of his men, doing a routine check. Vincent's gaze snapped to the pantry door. Isabella stiffened, terror flooding her face anew. She knew those men. Everyone did. In her small world, they were monsters in suits. "Stay here," Vincent said quietly. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." He stepped out and closed the door behind him, just as Marco appeared in the kitchen, his hand resting near his own weapon. "Boss," Marco said. "Everything okay?" "Thought I heard something." Vincent met his gaze without hesitation. "Just the house settling," he replied calmly. "Old walls make noise." Marco studied him for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. "All right, I'll finish the round." When the footsteps faded, Vincent leaned against the counter, breathing out slowly. In that single moment, he understood something terrifying. Telling his men about the child would be easy. Firing Carmen would be easy. Erasing this problem would be easy. He had built his entire empire on easy decisions. Choosing not to, that was the dangerous part. Vincent reopened the pantry door. Isabella looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear and something else he hadn't expected. Hope, small, fragile, and reckless. He realized then that this child didn't fear death. She feared losing the only person who loved her. And for the first time in his life, Vincent Torino felt unworthy of the power he held. Nothing in his world would ever be the same again. And it all began with a child hiding in the dark, eating leftovers like they were a feast. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Morning arrived quietly at the Torino mansion, the kind of deceptive calm that often preceded violence. Vincent Torino had not slept. He spent the hours before dawn seated in his study, staring at documents he had reviewed 1,000 times before, yet seeing none of them. Every figure blurred into the same image, a child curled up in his pantry, guarding leftovers like contraband. When the sky outside began to pale, Vincent realized something had shifted inside him, not softened, sharpened, as if a long-buried instinct had awakened. Carmen arrived at exactly 5:30, just as she always did. Vincent watched from the balcony above the kitchen as she entered through the service door, her coat thin, her steps careful. She moved like someone accustomed to staying unnoticed, as if the house itself might punish her for taking up space. In 3 years, she had never been late. In 3 years, she had never complained. He wondered now how much of her life had been poured into silence. Vincent waited until she had begun preparing breakfast before he spoke. "Carmen?" She turned sharply, startled. Fear crossed her face before she masked it with practiced politeness. "Mr. Torino?" she said, lowering her eyes. "Is something wrong?" "Sit down." The color drained from her face. To be asked to sit by a man like Vincent Torino did not suggest conversation. It suggested endings. Carmen wiped her hands on her apron, her fingers trembling as she obeyed. Vincent took the chair across from her. The distance between them felt heavier than the marble table that separated them. "Tell me about your daughter," he said. Carmen froze. Her breath caught, and her eyes darted toward the door as if calculating escape. She doesn't come here," she said quickly. "I swear. She stays home. She knows the rules." "I know," Vincent replied calmly. 2 words. That was all it took. Carmen's shoulders collapsed inward, years of restraint breaking at once. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Please don't fire me. I'll do anything. I'll work nights. I'll clean more rooms. Just please, don't take this job." Vincent leaned forward slightly. How long has she been hungry? The question stunned her. She stared at him as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Sir, how long?" he repeated, his voice low but unwavering. "Has your daughter been hungry?" The answer unraveled her. Carmen covered her face, sobbing openly now. "Since the medical bills started," she admitted. "Since the insurance stopped covering the medicine, since I had to choose between rent and groceries. I tried. Mr. Torino. I really did. I gave her my portions. I told her I wasn't hungry. She's a good girl. She never asks for more." Vincent listened without interrupting. Each word landed like a verdict. This woman had been fighting a losing war with dignity as her only weapon, and he had never noticed. The realization filled him with a slow, dangerous anger, not at Carmen, but at the world that forced such choices, and at himself for benefiting from it. What medicine, he asked. Carmen pressed a hand to her chest. For my lungs. The infection keeps coming back. While arrangements were made, Vincent retreated to his study with his lawyer. Set up a medical trust, he instructed. For Carmen. Lifetime coverage. His lawyer stared at him. Vincent, this isn't leverage. This isn't protection money. I know, Vincent replied. That's the point. The first real resistance came from his own people. Marco confronted him later that afternoon, voice low and tense. The men are talking. They think this is a mistake, that you're exposing weakness. Vincent's gaze hardened. Anyone who mistakes mercy for weakness is welcome to test that theory. Marco said nothing more. That evening, Vincent found Isabella sitting stiffly in a guest room, her feet not touching the floor. She looked up when he entered, fear flickering across her face before settling into guarded curiosity. Is my mama okay? She asked. She will be, Vincent said, but it will take time. And me? She asked quietly. Vincent hesitated. This was the moment he had been avoiding. The easiest answer was foster care, paperwork, distance, clean solutions. Instead, he heard himself say, You'll stay here, until she's better. Isabella's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with hope. Vincent realized then that he had crossed another line. He wasn't just protecting them anymore. He was choosing them. As night fell over the mansion, Vincent stood alone at his window, watching the city lights flicker below. Somewhere upstairs, a child slept without hunger for the first time in weeks. Somewhere else, a woman fought for her life with the best care money could buy. And for the first time since he built his empire, Vincent Torino felt the weight of something far heavier than power. He felt responsible. The first sign of trouble arrived before dawn. Vincent Torino was in his study when his phone vibrated once on the desk. Not a call, a message, short, coded, meant only for his inner circle. Someone had tested one of his docs during the night. Nothing major, just enough to see if the rumors were true, just enough to check whether the lion had lost his teeth. Vincent closed the message without replying. He already knew the answer they were waiting for. Down the hall. The mansion was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Since Isabella's arrival, Vincent had ordered half the staff reassigned and doubled security without explanation. He did not want unfamiliar faces near her. That decision alone had raised eyebrows. Power, he had learned, was not just what you did, it was what you refused to explain. In the guest room upstairs, Isabella slept curled around a borrowed pillow, her breathing finally even. Vincent had stood in the doorway for a long time the night before, watching her as if she might vanish if he looked away. He had seen grown men die with more noise than this child made while sleeping. The realization unsettled him more than any threat ever had. At the private hospital across the city, Carmen was being prepared for surgery. Vincent arrived just before sunrise, dressed impeccably as always, but there was tension in his shoulders that no tailor could hide. Doctor, Reeves met him in the corridor, his expression professional but grave. The infection has spread more than we thought, the doctor said quietly. We can operate, but recovery will be long. She pushed her body far beyond its limits. Vincent nodded once. She won't have to anymore. The words sounded final, even to him. As Carmen was taken into surgery, Vincent sat alone in the waiting area. No guards, no associates. Just a man in an expensive suit surrounded by plastic chairs and the hum of fluorescent lights. He thought about how easily Carmen could have asked for help, how easily he could have given it. Pride had kept her silent. Indifference had kept him blind. Somewhere between the two, a child had learned hunger as a habit. His phone buzzed again. This time, a call. Boss, Marco said, his voice tight. We've got a situation. Vincent stood. Talk. Rossi's people are moving on the east side. They're telling everyone you're distracted, that you've gone soft. Vincent's jaw tightened. And you're calling me because they're wrong, Marco said, but they need to be reminded. Vincent looked down the hospital corridor, toward the operating room where Carmen fought for her life. For a moment, the choice before him felt heavier than any he had ever made. If he left now, he would prove the rumors true. If he stayed, others would pay the price. I'll handle it, Vincent said calmly. Contain it, no civilians, no mistakes. When the call ended, Vincent sat back down. He did not leave the hospital. Instead, he made another call, this one quieter, more dangerous. Instructions were given, boundaries were set, and consequences were promised. Mercy did not mean surrender. It meant precision. Hours later, The surgery was over. "Doctor," Reeves approached him with cautious relief. "She made it through," he said. "The next 48 hours are critical, but she's strong." Vincent exhaled slowly, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "She'll need rest. Real rest. She'll have it," the doctor replied. "Thanks to you." Vincent didn't answer. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. It always had. By the time he returned to the mansion, the sun was high, and the world had adjusted to its new reality. 2 of Rossi's warehouses were closed. Permanently, the message had been delivered with surgical restraint. Enough damage to be understood, not enough to be reckless. The underworld would talk. Let them. Isabella was in the dining room when Vincent arrived, sitting at the far end of the long table with a book she clearly wasn't reading. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, her eyes searching his face before she spoke. "Did you go see my mama?" "Yes," Vincent said. "She's resting now." Isabella nodded, relief washing over her features. After a moment, she asked softly, "Am I in trouble?" The question stopped him. "No," he said firmly. "You're not." She hesitated. People always say that before they change their mind. Vincent pulled out a chair and sat across from her, closing the distance deliberately. "Listen to me," he said. "In this house, words mean something. When I say something, I don't take it back." Isabella studied him, as if testing the truth of that promise. Slowly, she relaxed. That evening, as Vincent reviewed reports in his study, he noticed something strange. The numbers still made sense. The territories were stable. The power was intact. And yet, for the first time, it all felt secondary. He found himself listening instead for small sounds from upstairs. Footsteps, a door closing, proof of life where there had been none before. Later that night, Vincent stood by the window again. The city stretched out beneath him like a living map of his past. He understood now what the others feared. It wasn't that he had become weak. It was that he had found something worth losing for. And that, in his world, was far more dangerous than cruelty. Carmen woke to silence. Not the heavy, threatening silence she had known all her life, but a gentler one, filled with distant beeping and the soft rhythm of machines doing work her body no longer could. Her chest ached, her throat burned, and for a terrifying second, she thought she had died. Then she remembered. The mansion. The kitchen. Vincent Torino's voice saying her name like it mattered. She turned her head slowly. White walls, clean sheets, a private room. This was not a place meant for women like her. Panic set in just as the door opened. Vincent stood there, immaculately dressed, a dark figure against the sterile brightness. For a moment, Carmen wondered if the medication was distorting reality. Then he spoke. "You're awake." She struggled to sit up, alarm flashing in her eyes. "Mr. Torino, I'm so sorry," she said hoarsely. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I can come back to work as soon as stop," Vincent said quietly. The single word carried weight, but not threat. He moved closer, pulling the chair beside her bed and sitting down, an act so unexpected it left Carmen speechless. No one like him sat at bedsides. People like him issued orders and walked away. "You're not going back to work," Vincent continued. "Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way you think." Carmen's heart clenched. "Please don't fire me." Vincent held her gaze. "You're not being fired." The words settled slowly, like snow on ground that had never known warmth. Carmen's eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hold back. "Then why am I here?" she whispered. "Because you were dying," Vincent answered without cruelty. "And because no one should have to choose between breathing and feeding their child." The truth of it broke her. Carmen turned her face toward the pillow, sobbing quietly, ashamed of her weakness even now. Vincent waited. He had learned that some silences were necessary. When she finally looked back at him, her voice was raw. "Is Isabella—" "She's safe," he said immediately. "She's at the house. She ate, she slept. She asked about you." Carmen closed her eyes, relief crashing over her so violently it made her dizzy. "Thank you," she breathed. "I don't know how to repay you." "You won't," Vincent replied. "That's not why I did this." The following days passed in a blur of medication, doctors, and cautious optimism. Carmen's condition stabilized, then slowly improved. Vincent visited every evening, never staying long, never bringing flowers or grand gestures, just updates, just consistency. It unsettled the nurses far more than his reputation ever could. Back at the mansion, Isabella struggled in ways Vincent had not anticipated. She followed rules obsessively. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. She asked permission before speaking, before sitting, before eating. Once, a glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Isabella froze, eyes wide, breath shallow, waiting for consequences that never came. Vincent found her like that, surrounded by shards and terror. "It was an accident," he said calmly. She shook her head. "I'll clean it. I won't do it again." He crouched down, careful not to cut himself. "Accidents are allowed here." She stared at him as if he were speaking another language. That night, Vincent made a decision that rippled quietly through the household. Carmen's position would change. She would not return as a maid. When she was strong enough, she would oversee household operations. Authority, not obedience. Respect, not invisibility. The announcement did not go unnoticed. Some staff were relieved, others were confused. A few were resentful. Power structures, once disturbed, rarely settled quietly. Marco voiced the concerns most of the men were thinking. "You're changing too much, too fast," he warned. "People are watching. Let them," Vincent replied. But the true cost of staying revealed itself a week later. A black sedan followed Isabella's car on the way back from school. It kept its distance, never crossing the line. A message, not an attack. Vincent recognized the tactic immediately. Someone wanted him to know they knew where his weakness lived. That evening, Vincent stood alone in his study, the weight of the city pressing against the glass. He understood now what he had done. By allowing himself to care, he had introduced uncertainty into a world that thrived on fear. Love, he realized, was not soft. It was reckless. Isabella knocked on the door, holding a piece of paper. "I drew something," she said hesitantly. Vincent took it. A simple sketch. A house. 3 figures standing in front of it. One tall, one medium, one small. Above them, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Here, not home, just here." Something tightened in Vincent's chest. That night, Vincent made arrangements. Routes were changed, guards reassigned, lines reinforced. He would not undo what he had done, but he would not allow it to destroy them either. Carmen was recovering. Isabella was beginning, slowly, to breathe without fear. And Vincent Torino stood between 2 worlds, fully aware that remaining where he was would demand sacrifices he had never planned to make. For the first time, he did not ask himself whether the cost was worth it. He already knew the answer. The city did not forgive hesitation. By the time Vincent Torino woke the morning after the black sedan appeared, 3 separate messages awaited him. None were explicit. None needed to be. A delayed shipment at the port. A meeting canceled without explanation. A longtime associate suddenly unreachable. The underworld was adjusting its posture, leaning closer, sniffing for weakness the way predators always did. Vincent read the reports without expression. He had expected this. Compassion, once revealed, was treated like blood in the water. What unsettled him was not the threat itself, but the clarity of it. Someone had crossed an invisible boundary by following Isabella. That line, once touched, could not be ignored. At breakfast, Isabella sat quietly across from him, her school uniform pressed, her backpack aligned carefully beside her chair. She ate slowly, methodically, as if speed might invite punishment. Vincent noticed the way her eyes flicked toward the windows each time a car passed the gate. "Do you like your school?" he asked, deliberately casual. She nodded. "It's nice." That was all she offered. Vincent knew better than to press. Children who learned to survive early learned silence faster than speech. Later that morning, Vincent convened a private meeting in his study. Marco stood near the door. 2 other lieutenants took seats opposite Vincent, their expressions guarded. They all knew why they were there. "Rossi is testing us," one of them said. "Small moves, no signatures. He thinks you won't respond." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "What do you think?" The lieutenant hesitated. "I think if we don't push back, others will follow." Vincent's gaze hardened. "And if we push too hard, then we prove him right." Marco said quietly, "That you're still dangerous." Vincent considered this. Violence was a language he spoke fluently, but language, like any other tool, could lose meaning if overused. He needed something precise, something unmistakable. "Close the east side warehouses," Vincent said at last. "Legally." The room went still. "Legally," the lieutenant repeated. "Yes," Vincent replied. "Audit them. Shut them down through the city. No blood. No spectacle." Marco studied him. "That will cost us." Vincent nodded. "It will cost them more." By afternoon, the message was clear. Rossi's operations stalled. Contracts froze. Pressure mounted from places he could not threaten with guns. The underworld watched closely, recalibrating. Vincent Torino had not abandoned power. He had simply chosen a different blade. That evening, Carmen was discharged from the hospital. Vincent met her at the entrance. Ignoring the looks of disbelief from staff and security alike, Carmen moved slowly, thinner than before but standing straighter, as if surviving had returned something to her she hadn't realized she'd lost. "I don't know how to thank you," she said again, tears shining in her eyes. "Then don't," Vincent replied. "Just get better." When Isabella saw her mother, she froze for a heartbeat, as if afraid the moment would break. Then she ran forward, careful arms wrapping around Carmen's waist. Carmen cried openly, holding her daughter as though letting go might erase her. Vincent turned away, giving them privacy. He did not trust himself to witness too much tenderness. That night, the test came. A call, past midnight. Marco's voice, tight. "We've got movement near the south gate, 2 vehicles, no plates." Vincent's response was immediate. "Lock it down, quietly," from his window. Vincent watched headlights pause at the edge of his property, then retreat. A warning. A reminder. The game had changed, but it had not ended. Later, Isabella knocked softly on his study door. She held herself stiffly, eyes downcast. "I heard the cars," she said. "Is it because of me?" The question struck deeper than any threat. Vincent set aside his papers and stood. He crossed the room and knelt so they were eye level. "No," he said firmly. "It's because of me." She frowned, confused. "Some people don't like it when I make choices they can't control," he continued. "That's not your fault. Ever." Isabella hesitated. "My mama says when people get angry, it's safer to leave." Vincent felt the weight of that truth. He placed a hand over hers, steady and deliberate. "Not here," he said. "Not anymore." That promise, he knew, was not just for her. It was a declaration to the world. The next day, Vincent made another move that stunned his inner circle. He transferred a significant portion of his assets into legitimate holdings, restructuring his empire in ways that made it harder to attack without consequence. Some called it retreat. Others called it evolution. Vincent called it insulation. Rossi made no further moves. For now. That evening, Vincent found Isabella in the garden, tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. She looked up as he approached. "Mama says you're busy because you're fixing things." "Yes," Vincent said. "I am." She nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for fixing us." The words lingered long after she returned inside. Alone again, Vincent stood beneath the open sky, aware that mercy had not weakened him. It had sharpened him, focused him, given him something worth defending. The underworld would continue to test him. They always did. But now, Vincent Torino was no longer fighting to maintain control. He was fighting to protect a future, and that made him far more dangerous than before. Stability did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, cautious and uneven, like light filtering through a room that had been dark for too long. In the weeks that followed, the Torino mansion settled into a new rhythm. The guards rotated more quietly. The cars followed different routes. Vincent adjusted schedules and security with the precision of a man who understood that safety was not a feeling, but a structure. Every choice was deliberate. Every silence accounted for. Carmen recovered slowly. Strength returned to her in increments she learned not to rush. Vincent insisted she remain away from physical work, despite her protests. Instead, he began involving her in decisions she had never been allowed near before: staffing schedules, supply contracts, household logistics. At first, Carmen spoke carefully, as if waiting to be corrected. Over time, her voice steadied. She discovered that competence, once recognized, could be transformative. Isabella watched these changes closely. She no longer flinched at sudden noises, but she still measured every reaction, every tone. Trust, Vincent realized, was not granted by safety alone. It required consistency and time. One afternoon, Vincent found her in the music room, a space that had gone unused for years. She sat at the piano bench, not playing, just touching the keys lightly as if testing whether sound was allowed. When she noticed him, she froze. "You can play," Vincent said. She shook her head. "I don't know how. That's how everyone starts," he replied. She considered this, then pressed a single key. The note rang out, hesitant but clear. Isabella smiled, surprised by her own courage. Vincent remained by the doorway, saying nothing. He understood now that protection did not always mean intervening. Sometimes it meant standing back. That evening, Carmen approached Vincent in the study. "She's sleeping better," she said. "She still wakes up sometimes, but she laughs now." Vincent nodded. "So do you." Carmen smiled faintly, then grew serious. I know this has cost you. Vincent met her gaze. Everything costs something. Yes, Carmen said quietly, but not everything gives something back. The words stayed with him long after she left. The real test arrived without warning. A call from Marco, urgent but controlled. We've got a problem, he said. Someone leaked information about the asset restructuring. Not Rossi, someone closer. Vincent closed his eyes briefly. Betrayal was not new to him. What was new was the risk it carried now. Contain it, he said. No retaliation yet. Boss. Not yet, Vincent repeated. The leak was traced within hours. A mid-level operator, ambitious and careless, convinced that Vincent's changes signaled decline. He had sold information for leverage, assuming the consequences would be manageable. Vincent ordered the man brought in. They met in a quiet room beneath the mansion, a place that had once been used for interrogations. Vincent stood across from the traitor, studying him with unreadable calm. The man spoke quickly, offering excuses, alliances, apologies. Vincent listened until the words ran out. You thought I was distracted, Vincent said finally. That I wouldn't notice. The man swallowed. I thought you'd changed. Vincent nodded once. I have. He turned and walked away. The punishment was not public. It was not violent. The man was stripped of access, influence, and protection, left exposed in a world Vincent controlled. Mercy, Vincent had learned, could be terrifying when wielded correctly. That night, Vincent returned upstairs later than usual. As he passed Isabella's room, he heard voices. Carmen sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Isabella's hair, her voice low and soothing. Vincent paused, unseen. Do you feel safe here? Carmen asked softly. Isabella hesitated. I think so. What makes you unsure? Isabella twisted the blanket between her fingers. It feels like it could disappear, like before. Carmen's hand stilled. Nothing disappears just because you believe in it. Vincent moved away quietly, his chest tight. The next morning, he made another decision. He arranged for Isabella to begin therapy, privately and discreetly, not because she was broken, but because survival left marks that love alone could not erase. Carmen agreed, relief evident in her eyes. Isabella resisted at first, then slowly opened herself to the process. Vincent watched from a distance, learning that protection sometimes meant allowing others to help. One evening, as Vincent reviewed reports, Isabella appeared in the doorway holding a small object. I made this, she said. It was a keychain. Uneven, handmade, a small house stitched onto fabric. It's for you, she added quickly, so you don't lose your keys. Vincent took it carefully. Thank you, she lingered. People don't usually stay, she said quietly. They say they will. Then they don't. Vincent knelt to her level. I won't promise things I can't keep, he said. But I will tell you this, I don't leave things unfinished. Isabella studied him, then nodded, as if accepting a contract written in truth rather than comfort. Later that night, Vincent stood alone on the balcony, the city humming below. He understood now that safety was not the absence of danger, it was the presence of resolve. The world would continue to test him. Enemies would circle. Power would demand proof. But inside his walls, something fragile was taking shape. Not perfection, not peace, but continuity. And for the first time in his life, Vincent Torino was learning how to protect something not by force alone, but by staying. The warning came disguised as opportunity. Vincent Torino received the proposal during a late-night meeting with his most trusted associates. A new corridor for distribution, clean on paper, shielded by legitimate companies and political favors. Profitable, efficient, safe, too safe. Vincent recognized the scent immediately. It was bait, carefully wrapped in respect and reason. Marco saw it too. This puts us back on top, he said cautiously. But it puts us back in places you've been pulling away from. Vincent did not answer at once. His gaze drifted toward the window, toward the upper floors of the mansion where light still glowed softly. He thought of Isabella practicing piano in the afternoons, of Carmen standing straighter with every passing day, of the fragile equilibrium he had built with intention rather than force. Who's backing it? Vincent asked. Rossi, Marco replied. Through intermediaries. That settled it. Declining the offer would be seen as weakness. Accepting it would place Isabella within reach of people who understood leverage better than loyalty. There was no version of this decision without consequences. Vincent declined. The fallout was swift. 2 days later, a fire broke out at one of Vincent's legitimate warehouses. No casualties. Clean execution. A message. The city's pulse shifted subtly, tension rippling outward. Whispers followed. Allies questioned. Enemies recalculated. Vincent felt the pressure close in, familiar and cold. At dinner that night, Isabella noticed the change before anyone else. She studied Vincent with quiet attention. Her fork paused midair. "You're thinking very loud," she said. Vincent almost smiled. "Am I?" She nodded. "Mama does that too when she's worried." Carmen glanced up, surprised. Vincent met her eyes briefly, then looked back to Isabella. "Some problems take longer to solve," he said. "Do they go away?" Isabella asked. "No," Vincent replied honestly, "but they can be managed." Later that evening, Marco brought news Vincent had been anticipating. "Rossi's people are escalating. They're pressing suppliers, trying to isolate us." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Then we make it clear isolation won't work." How, Marco asked. Vincent's voice was calm. "By removing the temptation." The next move shocked even his inner circle. Vincent ordered the sale of a major asset, a stronghold that had defined his influence for over a decade. It was profitable, strategic, symbolic. Letting it go would be seen as retreat by some, madness by others. But it would also remove a vulnerability. The deal closed within 48 hours. The city reeled. Rossi made no attempt to hide his satisfaction. Vincent had given up ground, or so it seemed. What Vincent gained was distance. Security protocols shifted again. Isabella's routes changed daily. Her presence at public events ceased entirely. The mansion became quieter, more inward-facing. Carmen noticed, though she said nothing. She had learned the cost of questions. The true test came one stormy afternoon. Isabella was late returning from therapy. Vincent stood by the window, watching rain smear the city into gray streaks. His phone lay silent on the desk, too silent. When it finally rang, his chest tightened before he even answered. "She's safe," Marco said immediately, "but there was an incident." Vincent closed his eyes. "Talk." "A vehicle followed her driver. No contact. They backed off when our team intervened." Vincent felt something sharp and unyielding settle in his chest. Fear, yes, but beneath it, resolve. That evening, Vincent sat with Isabella in the library. She held a book open on her lap, but wasn't reading. He could tell by the way her fingers pressed into the pages. "Something scared you today?" Vincent said. She hesitated, then nodded. "The car wouldn't stop following us." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Did anyone hurt you?" "No," she said quickly. "But I thought you might be angry." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because trouble follows me," she whispered. Vincent stood and crossed the room. He knelt in front of her, steady and unhurried. "Trouble follows me," he corrected. "You are not the cause. You are the reason I stop it." She searched his face, looking for cracks, finding none. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. The gesture was small, tentative, but it carried more weight than any oath. Vincent froze for a fraction of a second before returning the embrace. Careful, protective. That night, Vincent made the most difficult decision of his life. He called Rossi. The conversation was brief, polite, final. Vincent offered terms that surprised everyone who heard of them later. Territory exchanged for peace, distance purchased with power. It was not surrender. It was selection. Rossi accepted. The city exhaled. Weeks passed. The pressure eased. Isabella laughed more freely. Carmen began planning schedules that extended months into the future, something she had never allowed herself to do before. Vincent watched it all with a quiet intensity, aware that every moment of calm had been bought deliberately. One evening, Isabella sat beside Vincent on the balcony, the city lights glowing below. "Did you give something up because of me?" she asked suddenly. Vincent did not deny it. "Yes," her voice trembled. "I didn't ask you to. I know," he said. "That's why it matters." She leaned her head against his arm, trusting the answer without fully understanding it. Vincent looked out over the city, aware that he had chosen a path that could never be undone. Power could be rebuilt. Territory could be reclaimed. But the moment you chose to protect someone over yourself, the cost became permanent. And Vincent Torino had never been more certain of anything in his life. Peace had a way of revealing what chaos concealed. With Rossi's agreement holding and the city settling into a cautious calm, Vincent Torino found himself facing a quieter, more dangerous adversary of the past. The absence of immediate threats created space, and in that space, questions began to breathe. It started with a document. Carmen found it by accident while organizing old household records. A thin folder misfiled among expense reports. It bore Isabella's name in handwriting that did not belong to anyone in the mansion. Dates, a clinic, a signature Carmen recognized with a jolt of disbelief. She did not confront Vincent immediately. Instead, she sat alone in her room long after Isabella had fallen asleep, staring at the paper as if it might change under her gaze. The truth it hinted at was impossible, and yet it made too much sense. The next morning, Carmen requested a private conversation. Vincent met her in the garden, a place chosen for its openness. Carmen's hands trembled slightly as she held the folder. "You knew," she said, not accusing, not pleading, just stating a fact she was still learning how to carry. Vincent did not pretend otherwise. "Yes. How long?" "Since the night I found Isabella," he replied. Carmen closed her eyes. The pieces aligned painfully: the protection, the restraint, the way Vincent had watched Isabella as if she were both fragile and familiar. "Why didn't you tell me? Because knowing would have put you in danger." Vincent said, "And her?" Carmen's voice broke. "So it's true." Vincent nodded once. "Isabella is my daughter." The words landed softly, but their weight was immense. Carmen sank onto the stone bench, breath shallow. She remembered that night years ago, the brief encounter she had tried to forget, the man she never expected to see again. Power had separated them. Fear had kept her silent. Survival had demanded it. "You took her from me," Carmen asked. The fear sharp now. "No," Vincent said firmly. "I protected her without claiming her." Carmen searched his face, finding no deception there, only regret and resolve. "Does she know?" Carmen asked. "No," Vincent replied, "and she won't unless you agree." Silence stretched between them, filled with birdsong and distant traffic. Carmen's tears fell quietly, not of anger, but of grief for the years lost, the truth buried, the impossible choices made without her consent. That evening, Vincent watched Isabella closely at dinner. She chatted animatedly about school, about a story she was writing, about how the piano sounded different when the windows were open. He saw her now with unbearable clarity: her expressions, her stubbornness, the familiar intensity behind her eyes. She was his, completely, and he had never felt less entitled to anything. The reckoning came sooner than expected. A message arrived late that night, encrypted and urgent, a former associate of Rossi's, desperate and exposed, offering information in exchange for protection. The information concerned Vincent. Specifically, Isabella. Vincent listened to the recording in silence. A plan half formed. A rumor turned weapon. Someone knew, or suspected enough to try. Vincent acted immediately. By dawn, the associate was secured, the leak contained, but the damage had been done. The truth was no longer just a secret between adults. It was a liability. Carmen confronted Vincent again, fear blazing now. "You said she'd be safe." "She is," Vincent said, "but safety changes when the truth becomes leverage." "What are you saying?" Vincent hesitated. For the first time, hesitation was visible. "I'm saying we may not get to choose the timing." Carmen's hands curled into fists. "Then we tell her. On our terms." Vincent looked toward the stairs, toward Isabella's room. The thought terrified him more than any enemy ever had. But Carmen was right. Secrets protected until they didn't. The next day unfolded with deliberate normalcy. Isabella attended school, practiced piano, laughed at lunch. Vincent and Carmen prepared quietly, each wrestling with their own version of fear. That evening, Vincent sat with Isabella in the library, the same room where trust had first taken root. Carmen joined them, her presence steady, her expression gentle but resolute. "Is something wrong?" Isabella asked. Sensing the gravity, Vincent took a breath. "We need to tell you something important." Isabella's shoulders tensed. "Did I do something bad?" "No," Carmen said quickly, pulling her close. "Never." Vincent met Isabella's gaze. "Everything we tell you is because we love you." Isabella frowned. "You already do that." Vincent smiled faintly. "Yes, but there's more." The truth was spoken carefully, in fragments, in language chosen to protect rather than overwhelm. Vincent explained his past. Carmen explained her silence, the connection between them, once hidden, laid bare with honesty and restraint. Isabella listened without interruption. When it was over, she said nothing at first. Her eyes moved from Carmen to Vincent, searching, recalibrating. "You're my father," she asked finally. Vincent nodded. "If you want me to be." She considered this. Small hands clenched in her lap. "Did you stay because you had to?" Vincent said softly. "I stayed because I wanted to." Isabella swallowed. "Does that mean you'll leave someday?" The question cut deep. "No," Vincent said. "It means I should have been here sooner." Isabella leaned into Carmen. then slowly reached for Vincent's hand. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just don't disappear." Vincent closed his fingers around hers, grounding himself in the moment. "I won't. Outside." The city pulsed on, indifferent and relentless. Inside the mansion, something irrevocable had shifted. The truth was no longer a threat. It was a bond. And Vincent Torino understood that love, once acknowledged, demanded a different kind of courage. The truth did not break them. It reshaped them. In the days following Isabella's revelation, the mansion moved differently, as if every wall had learned to listen more carefully. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments. No tears that demanded witnesses. Instead, there was adjustment, subtle and profound, the kind that altered the air rather than the furniture. Isabella began calling Vincent Papa by accident at first. The words slipped out during small moments, unguarded and soft, each time it happened. Vincent felt something tighten behind his ribs, a pressure that had nothing to do with fear. He never corrected her. He simply answered. Carmen watched this transformation with cautious wonder. She had spent years building her life around absence, teaching herself not to expect permanence. Now, permanence stood in front of her every morning, pouring coffee, asking about schedules, listening. It unsettled her more than danger ever had. One evening, as Isabella slept, Carmen found Vincent in the study. The room was quieter than usual, the city's glow dimmed by rain. "She's adjusting," Carmen said. "Better than I thought." Vincent nodded. "She's strong." "So are you," Carmen replied, surprising them both. Vincent looked up. "I wasn't." "You are now," she said simply. The words lingered between them, unclaimed but undeniable. Outside the mansion, the world did not pause for personal revelations. Vincent's enemies remained quiet, but quiet did not mean gone. Intelligence reports suggested movement at the edges, alliances shifting, opportunists watching for instability. Vincent anticipated one final test. Power never allowed graceful exits. The test arrived in the form of an invitation. A gala, public, high profile, a gathering of legitimate power brokers, politicians, and businessmen. Vincent's presence was requested. His absence would be noticed. More importantly, it would be interpreted. Marco was direct. "It's safe," he said. "But it's a stage." Vincent understood immediately. "They want to see who I am now." "Yes," Marco replied. "And whether you still belong." Vincent agreed to attend. The night of the gala marked Isabella's first public appearance beside him. She wore a simple dress, elegant without excess. Carmen stayed close, her hand resting lightly on Isabella's shoulder. As they entered the hall, conversations softened, eyes turned, judgments formed. Vincent felt the weight of every gaze, measuring not his power, but his choices. He did not flinch. Throughout the evening, Vincent introduced Isabella without explanation. No declarations, no defenses, just presence. The message was clear enough. One man approached, smile too practiced. "Your daughter?" he asked. "Yes," Vincent replied. The man nodded. Recalculating. "She's lucky." Vincent's answer was immediate. "So am I." The room adjusted. Respect shifted from fear to something more complicated. Vincent felt it settle into place. A new equilibrium forged not by threat, but by certainty. Later that night, Isabella tugged at Vincent's sleeve. "Everyone keeps looking at us." "They're curious," Vincent said. "About what?" "About whether I'll protect what matters to me." She thought about this. "Will you?" Vincent met her gaze. "Always." The final ripple came days later. Rossi reached out, requesting a meeting. Neutral ground. One last conversation. Vincent agreed, already knowing the outcome. They met in a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. No guards in sight. Though both men knew they were never truly alone. Rossi studied Vincent carefully, eyes sharp. "You've changed," Rossi said. "Yes," Vincent replied. "You've given up a great deal." Vincent smiled faintly. "I've chosen what to keep." Rossi leaned back. "And if someone challenges that choice," Vincent's voice was calm, unyielding. "Then they'll learn the difference between mercy and surrender." Rossi laughed softly. "You were always dangerous." "I see now why." The meeting ended without threats, without promises. It was enough. At home that night, the mansion felt warmer than usual. Isabella fell asleep on the couch, her head against Vincent's arm, a book open and forgotten in her lap. Carmen watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Vincent looked up. "She trusts me," he said quietly. Carmen stepped closer. "She always did. She just didn't know why." Vincent hesitated. Then spoke the truth he had been circling for weeks. I don't want to build a future around fear anymore. Carmen met his eyes. Then don't. I want something stable, he continued. Something real. With both of you. Silence followed, heavy but not cold. Carmen reached out, placing her hand over his. Then stop standing at the edge of it. Vincent felt the final barrier dissolve, not with drama, but with acceptance. The past had been survived. The present claimed. The future, for the first time, felt intentional. Outside, the city lights shimmered, indifferent to personal victories. Inside, Vincent Torino understood that the ending he had feared was not loss. It was arrival. And the happiness waiting ahead would not be loud. It would be lasting. Future did not announce itself with fireworks. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine. Mornings at the mansion began with sunlight instead of tension. Vincent learned the rhythm of shared breakfasts, the subtle negotiations over what Isabella would eat first, the way Carmen moved through the space as if it finally belonged to her. These moments would have once felt dangerously soft. Now, they felt earned. Vincent's world did not disappear. It transformed. He continued to meet investors, oversee operations, and manage the remnants of an empire that had once thrived on fear. But his decisions were guided by a new axis. Violence became a last resort, not a reflex. Power was measured not by how much he could take, but by how much he could refuse. The city noticed. Some whispered that Vincent Torino had grown sentimental. Others said he had grown smarter. Those closest to the truth understood that he had finally learned what leverage really was. At home, Isabella flourished. She played piano in the afternoons, her melodies uneven but determined. Vincent listened from a distance, pretending to read while memorizing every sound. He attended school events without spectacle, standing among other parents, unnoticed and unthreatening. Isabella waved at him from stages and classrooms. Pride unhidden, each wave felt like a victory greater than any deal he had ever closed. Carmen watched it all with a guarded heart that slowly learned to rest. One evening, after Isabella had fallen asleep, Carmen and Vincent sat together on the balcony. The city stretched endlessly below them, familiar and changed. You didn't have to choose this, Carmen said quietly. Vincent turned toward her. I know. You could have kept your distance, stayed powerful, untouched. Vincent smiled faintly. I was untouched. That was the problem. Carmen studied him, seeing not the man who frightened the city, but the one who knelt to tie Isabella's shoes, who listened more than he spoke, who stayed. What happens when the past catches up, she asked. Vincent did not avoid the question. Then we face it together. The words were simple. Their meaning was not. The final reckoning came months later, unexpectedly restrained. A rival syndicate made a move, testing boundaries Vincent had redrawn. It was aggressive but clumsy, built on old assumptions. Vincent responded decisively, not with bloodshed, but with exposure. Accounts frozen, alliances dissolved, influence redirected. The attack collapsed under its own weight. The message was unmistakable. Vincent Torino had not abandoned his power. He had refined it. After that, the city settled into a new understanding. Vincent was no longer the man who ruled through fear alone. He was something harder to challenge. A man with roots. The change allowed space for something Vincent had never planned for. Love. It unfolded slowly, without drama, woven into ordinary days. Shared dinners, quiet conversations after Isabella went to bed. Carmen's laughter. Once rare, became familiar. Vincent found himself learning her moods, her silences, the way her hand fit into his without hesitation. One evening, Vincent returned home earlier than usual. He found Isabella in the living room, carefully arranging something on the table. Carmen stood nearby, trying not to smile. What's this? Vincent asked. Isabella beamed. It's a house. For us, it was a drawing. Crayon lines uneven but confident. 3 figures stood in front of a home with too many windows and a garden that defied scale. Vincent knelt beside her. It's beautiful. You're all inside, she said, pointing. No one's leaving. The simplicity of it stole his breath. Later that night, Vincent stood with Carmen in the quiet kitchen. The house slept around them, peaceful and unaware of how rare that peace was. I don't want this to be temporary, Vincent said. Carmen met his gaze, searching for uncertainty and finding none. Neither do I. The commitment was not sealed with grand gestures or declarations. It was sealed in continuity, in choosing the same table every morning, in showing up, in staying. Years later, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. Isabella grew taller, louder, more certain of herself. She argued with Vincent about curfews and music, about independence and trust. Each argument ended the same way, with resolution rather than distance. Vincent learned that love did not weaken authority, it humanized it. Carmen built a life beyond survival. She managed household operations with confidence, then branched into ventures of her own, supported but never controlled. Vincent admired her strength, not because it endured hardship, but because it chose growth. On an unremarkable afternoon, Vincent watched Isabella run through the garden, her laughter echoing freely. Carmen stood beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "This is it," Vincent said softly. Carmen smiled. "This is home." Vincent understood then that happiness was not the absence of danger, nor the reward at the end of struggle. It was the decision to build something that could withstand both. The man who once ruled through shadows now lived in the light he helped create. And the ending he never believed he deserved was not an ending at all. It was a beginning that stayed.